This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today it's another kind of paranormal related podcast, but more astrology. And I'm going to learn something new today because I'm not very familiar with this topic. He's the author of several books, including Into the Rabbit Hole and Into the Veil. Micah Dank, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. My book series is actually called Into the Rabbit Hole. It's an 8-book series.
Okay, cool. And you're actually going to give a presentation today where I guess you're going to talk about the book series and what you've been researching all these years related
What I'm
to
going
it.
to do is I'm going to show you what I've been researching. Yes, I'm going to show you what I've found out, the conclusions I've come to.
Very good. So this is the first time that it's going to be kind of a presentation on this channel. So looking forward to it. So just let me know when you want me to get into it. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
You got it. Okay. So you've read the Bible, right?
Yes, I read it a couple of times in the Quran once as well, even.
Okay, I'm going to teach you how to read it properly today. So if you want to put up the presentation, I can start with it. All right. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I hope you don't, I'm not trying to be rude, but if I say next, or, I'm just talking and then I say next, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to.
No problem at all. This is, I'll go to school here on this. Go ahead.
All right, beautiful. So I start my presentation by saying, by the way, shout out to the last guy who commented, by the way. Thanks, brother, for following my work. Employ your time in improving yourself by other men's writings, so that you shall come easily by what others have labored hard for. So, Hannibal, this is what I've done, is I've studied the esoteric sciences for, let's say, 30 years. I've studied the Bible for 30 years. I've studied the esoteric sciences for 20. I've studied astrotheology for 11. I've been a teacher for 3. Okay? I'm one of the best in the world. Okay? And I don't say that lightly. I'm one of the best in the world at explaining this, and I have my own kind of spin on this. So I want to teach you how to read the Bible astrologically, how it was originally meant to be taken. So, next, please. The scriptures are they're made up of what's known as the 7 holy sciences. Technically, it's 10, but this slide only held 7. So the scriptures are metaphysical, astrological, which we're going to go into, anatomical, alchemical, spiritual, esoteric, and mythology. The Bible is not literal. It's not history. It's not reality. And it's not original. But it's all those sciences. It's also an etymology book, which is the study of how words originate. It's a gematria book, which is the study of numbers and number patterns. It's a numerology book, which is the information behind the numbers. So I wanted you to know that first. It was important for you to know this first, because we're going to make a case for that. So next, if you look at the next slide, you'll see the zodiac, okay? And Cancer's at the top and Capricorn's at the bottom. This is how the zodiac is supposed to look, okay? Because at the bottom of Cancer, at Capricorn, okay, that's the winter solstice. But when the sun is at the top of Cancer, that's the summer solstice, okay? So if you go to the next slide, the sciences of astrology go back 17,000 years to 40,000 years. And if you go to the next slide, here's a slide that says the Lascaux cave paintings are 17,000 years ago. And the world's oldest cave paintings show humans understood complex astronomy 40,000 years ago. So the last slide said Lascaux caves. They're called the Lascaux caves because they're in Lascaux, France. And the reason they're called the Lascaux caves is because they're in Lascaux, France. It's nothing special. But what happened that was special was there were some teenagers that found this cave that went deep, deep into it. They went all the way to the back of it. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see what they found against the back of the wall. Okay, you'll see these drawings. On the top left, you have the bull. On the right, you have the lion. And on the bottom, you have the horse. Okay, now they quickly realized, these teenagers, that the bulls were Taurus, that the lions were Leo in astrology, and that the horse was Sagittarius. It's just missing the guy with the bow and the arrow. So what they did was they called some scientists in because they found this and they feel like no one had ever seen it, and they were right. The scientists carbon dated the wall. Now, for people who argue against carbon dating, it's actually half true. Carbon-14 dating is accurate up to 50,000 years. It is. But when you start dating the millions of years, or they say this thing was 149 million, they don't know what they're talking about. Carbon, it just doesn't half-life that way. You have to get into some uranium datings or some other types of carbon datings, but basically what you need to know is they dated the wall at 17,000 years. Now, what they then did was they called in an astronomer and an astrologer in with a computer, because the computer has a program that could do what I'm about to tell you it did. What they did was they rewound the stars back, the sky back 17,000 years, okay, where they were located, and they printed out what they saw. And what they did was when they printed out what they saw and superimposed it on the cave, all these constellations lined up. So the bull was where Taurus was 17,000 years ago. The horse is where Sagittarius was 17,000 years ago. The lion was the same. Okay. Now, that shows you that we have knowledge 17,000 years ago of astrology. Okay. Now, as applied to the Bible, there's questions you can ask. So go to the next slide. How Jesus was able to heal the blind, how he walked on water, how he turned water into wine, why he had 12 disciples, why he was betrayed with a kiss by Judas, why he was dead for 3 days, why is his birthday on December 25th? These are all good questions, and they're all astrology when you break it down, and I'm going to do that for you. So if you go to the next slide, Genesis 1:14 says, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years." And that's basically what the Bible does. So if you go to the next slide, I say each zodiac is called a house. Each zodiac sign is called a house, or an era, or an eon, or a sign. There are many words for it. So what I'm going to do now is, Hannibal, I'm going to teach you the 12 zodiac signs. Are you familiar with them ahead of time at all?
I know I'm Libra. And
I'm a Libra too, bud.
okay, cool. I'm somewhat familiar as far as various girls I've dated have been
You've
into
had to
it.
get, yeah, they've asked for your birth time and birth city, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've never really researched it that deeply.
Okay. What I do is slightly different than astrology, bud. This is slightly different. This is astrotheology. They're cousins in the field, but they're a little different. But I'm going to teach you the 12 signs of the zodiac, how it used to be taught. So we'll start with Aquarius. If you go to the next slide, the first sign I talk about is Aquarius, which is represented by the man with the water pitcher. Now, technically, Aries begins the year on March 21st, the spring equinox. But I start in Aquarius because that's kind of the beginning of our new year. Okay, it goes back to the story of Zeus and the young boy. That's the story of Aquarius. The man with the water pitcher pouring it out goes back to Zeus and the young boy. Zeus saw a 14-year-old blonde boy on earth and wanted him in heaven. The boy's father didn't want to let him go. What eventually happened was Zeus bargained with the boy's father, because the boy's father was like, this is Zeus we're talking about. He could eliminate me in a second. So Zeus gives him a bunch of stuff, and the boy goes up to heaven. While he's in heaven, he's feeding everyone out of this water pitcher, something called ambrosia, which was the nectar of the gods. It's what the gods drank. What happened then was one day he got fed up with doing this day in and day out, day in and day out. He goes to the side of heaven with the water pitcher and pours it over the edge of heaven, thus causing a flood on earth. That's where the Greeks get their flood story from. Okay. And then what basically happened was Zeus, in a moment of reflection, because Zeus was always known to be volatile, right? But in a moment of self-reflection and uncharacteristically Zeus, he felt sympathy for the boy for bringing him up. So he immortalized him as the constellation Aquarius instead of punishing him. So there's key words in Aquarius, the sign of the man. For example, son of man or man, because the sign of the man is Aquarius. Whereas, excuse me, the son of man or man, Aquarius is the sign of the man, whereas Virgo is the sign of the woman. Baptism, because this is how you baptize someone. Water pitcher, because, well, this is a water pitcher. Fountain, because this is how fountains are built. You know, you ever see a fountain built like this? Stream, river, water, pond, lake, ocean, sea. These are all water examples. And because there's water in Aquarius, it's used to explain water. See, what I'm going to do, Hannibal, is I'm going to take these 12 signs and I'm going to give you keywords that relate to them, that you can obviously see relate to them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use those keywords and decode the whole Bible. It's that simple. That's what we're going to do. So the next sign is Pisces, if you go to the next sign, which is the sign of the two fish in the water. So all the water examples still remain: stream, river, pond, lake, sea, ocean. Now, the first two signs I gave you are water-based. So how do you know which one they're talking about? Well, it depends on the patterns that you see in the sky, okay? So if you go to the next slide, Aries is the ram. And in Aries, you have March 21st, which is the spring equinox. It's a 12-hour day, a 12-hour night. It's also the Passover, or the passing over of the sun over the equator. That's the first Passover. And back on its way to its height in the summer solstice. The second Passover is Easter. In Christianity, the passing over is changed, and it's called the resurrection of God's Son. Then the third Passover is the Jewish Passover, where the angel of death passes over all the houses that don't have the lamb or the ram. You see Aries right here, Aries being the ram right there, Aries the ram. Anyone that doesn't have the ram's blood smeared on their doorposts, okay, because the Jews are the people of the age of Aries, their firstborn sons get killed. So you have three different Passovers. You have March 21st, which is the spring equinox. That's the beginning. So what happens here is the sun crosses over the equator and starts to make its way back up height to the summer solstice. So it's celebrated. So that's basically what it is. So if you go to the next slide, you have Taurus. Now, Taurus is the bull. And when you look in the sky and you see Taurus during the season where it's supposed to be, you know that you need to put the plow on the bull. See, it's as above, so below. I'm sure you've heard that before. As above, so below. You see the bull in the sky, you put the plow on the bull on earth. See, now we have John Deere equipment that does this kind of stuff for us. However, back in the day, they didn't. They had the bull 3,000 years ago. Okay? So you plant the seeds in Taurus so that you can harvest in Virgo and Libra. So the keywords here are bull, ox, calf, or cow, cow being the female bull. Now, if you go to the next slide, Gemini is the twins. It's the story of Castor and Pollux Troy, whose sister was Helen of Troy. It's the story of Achilles. This is another Greek story, Hannibal. So whenever you hear the words twins or brothers, you're talking about Gemini. Now, the next one is Cancer, the crab. The crab is the sideways moving creature, okay? And the reason Cancer is the crab is because, watch what I do. Let me just move this here a second. Okay. So, the sun on December 25th rises a degree a day. The next day on the 26th, it rises an additional degree. Every following day, it rises an additional degree. It stops rising a degree on June 21st, where instead of rising or lowering a degree, it walks sideways like the crab. It stays at that exact same height for 3 days. Then on June 25th, it drops a degree. And then the next day, it drops another degree. And now the nights are getting longer, the days are getting shorter. When it gets to December 21st, okay? When it gets to December 21st, that's the winter solstice. It's the shortest night of the year. I mean, the shortest day of the year. It's the longest night. The ancients would go out in the morning on December 21st and look at the sky. The sun wouldn't even crack the horizon. So the ancients would look to each other and they would say the sun was dead. And then, again, like the crab walking sideways in June, it walks sideways in December for 3 days. So suddenly God's son was dead for 3 days. Where then on December 25th, the birth of every ancient god, the sun comes back to life on December 25th. That's why it's celebrated as Christmas, as all the holidays are. Okay.
So you say every ancient god, so more than Jesus, they're like even the Greek gods and stuff were also December 25th.
Well, it wouldn't be so much the Greek gods, but it would be like the Sumerian gods. For example, Horus, the Egyptian god.
Okay.
Horus, the Egyptian god. Mithra, Tammuz. I could go on and list. I actually have a slide that lists all of them. We're not going to get to it today. If your audience likes this and you like this, I can come back on and do the second half today. I mean, not today, but another day.
Sounds good.
All right. So we'll see how you feel about this. All right. We'll let my work speak for itself. So whenever you hear crab or beetle, and the reason beetle is because in the Egyptian times, Cancer in the zodiac was the scarab. We even get the word crab from scarab. It was the ancient beetle. So that's Cancer. If you go to the next slide, that's Leo, who's the king. He's the lion, he's the king of the jungle, or he's the king of the savannah, whatever you want to call it. Now, the ruling planet of Leo is actually the sun. Okay? So the lion, lioness, or cub, when you hear those words, that's Leo. Now, if you go to Virgo, which is the next one, this one starts to get interesting. Virgo is the woman holding the wheat stalk. That's the picture of Virgo. Remember before when we said that you plant in Taurus? Well, the virgins would cultivate the wheat in order to make the bread for the year during Virgo. So whenever you hear virgin, wheat, grain, woman, because Virgo is the sign of the woman, okay, seed, barley, corn, these are all grainy things that are harvested in Virgo. They're talking about Virgo. Now, if you go to the next slide, that's Libra. This one's a little more complicated. Libra is the justice. It's the scales. It's the balance. It does this. Arms out. It's the scales. It's the balance. It's the just one. The reason it's the justice is because it judges God's sun as it passes over the fall equinox and begins its descent into winter, into cold, into death. The Jews always celebrate the new year around the fall equinox. Okay? And 8 days after the Jewish New Year, you have a day called Yom Kippur, which is the day of judgment. Of course, the day of judgment's in Libra, the judge. Okay, Libra is also wine season. So when you plant for the grapes in Taurus, you press the wine here. Anybody that's ever been to a vineyard knows that the vines are completely lush during September, October. Okay, see, that's the problem with, hold on a sec. That's the problem with bachelorette parties, man. All these girls, they want to go during the spring, right when it gets warm. But that's stupid because the vines are bare empty. Go during September, October for a bachelorette party. Okay? You can walk up and down. You can literally pick the grapes and hoard them and eat them. It's fantastic. Okay? So all law-related things. Law, judge, justice, the just one, divorce, marriage, court. All wine-related things. Wine, vineyard, wine press. All olive oil-related things because it's also the season where you press the olives into the oil. Incidentally, when you get to the New Testament, frankincense and myrrh, two of the plants the wise men bring, are both olive plants too. Okay, so there's a code that I'm going to show you how it works. So after Libra, you have Scorpio, which is the betrayer. He's the scorpion. He is known as the betrayer. The reason he's the betrayer is because when you have a scorpion bite you, it leaves an imprint in your skin that looks like a pair of lips. It's why the mafia has the kiss of death. And it's why Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss. So the sun is judged in Libra, right? It's betrayed in Scorpio. And finally, in the last sign, in Sagittarius, this is where the bow and the arrow shoot the sun, effectively killing it. Why? Well, I mentioned to you December 21st was the day of death. December 21st is the last day of Sagittarius. It remains at that lowest level for 3 days, and then it comes back to life. So whenever you hear horse, bow and arrow, spear, or horseman, you're talking about Sagittarius. Now, the next one is the last one, which is Capricorn, who is the goat. Now, if you look at the zodiac wheel on the right, Capricorn's all the way at the bottom. So imagine a little dot all the way at the bottom, crawling to the left, going a degree a day, climbing all the way to its height in Cancer in 180 days. It starts to climb up the great mountain in Capricorn. The reason Capricorn is the goat is because the mountain goat climbs up the mountain better than anyone. It's the hero's journey. So these are the 12 signs. You've probably never heard them explained like that. What do you think so far? Now, as far as it goes, I am not going to drill you on the key words, right? I'm not going to drill you on the key words. But what I will do is I will remind you what we've already talked about as we go through this. So what do you think so far?
It's interesting, actually. This is the first time I've actually gone through all the signs in any way. So
this is how the ancients used to understand the signs. This is what we've lost. This is what we've lost. Nowadays, everybody's just like, oh, all the girls ask you for your sun sign, right? Yeah. Really good astrologers, they do what they did to you, and they ask you for your birth date because they get your chart. You know, really good astrologers know what to look at. I have a really good astrologer. Okay. But let's continue. Do you want to stay? Do you want to stay on, or do you want to jump off?
No, that's interesting, and you were the most detailed about our sign, so very interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah. I'm September 26th, by the way. I don't know about you.
October 16th.
Okay, so you're an October Libra. That's fine. So there's names for Jesus, Hannibal, okay, that he's given in church that are all astrology that people don't realize. Now, based on what I just told you, let's go over them. Capricorn is the goat. I am loving these comments from your people, man. I'm sorry. They're distracting, but I'm like smiling right now. Capricorn is the goat. So when you have Jesus, the Son, because remember, he's the S-U-N of God, not the S-O-N. He's a solar deity. When he's in Capricorn, the goat, they call him the scapegoat of Israel in church. Now, when the Sun is in Aquarius, he's known as the Son of Man. When the Sun is in Pisces, the two fish, he's the fisherman of men. And it's also why he feeds the masses with two fish. When the Sun is in Aries, he's the Lamb of God. When the Sun is in Cancer, the scarab, the beetle, St. Augustine calls Jesus the good beetle. When the Sun is in Leo, the lion, he's called the Lion of Judah. The lady holding the stalk of wheat, Virgo, he's born of a virgin, and he's called the bread of life. Libra is the scales of justice. He's known as the just one. Then he's betrayed in Scorpio. He dies in Sagittarius on December 21st. It's also why he's worshipped on the Sun Day. See, the Jewish people worship on the Saturday or the Saturn Day because their religion goes back to Saturnalia worship, whereas the Christians worship the sun. That's why they have the Sun Day. So I want to draw your attention to a couple of things, Hannibal, okay? I know you can hear me. The sun behind his head, the two fingers up like this. Let me see if I can get it on camera. There we go. Two fingers up like this. The white and the red cloak. The heart outside the body and the crown of thorns and that white face of his. Now, next slide, please. The sun is always behind Jesus because he represents the sun. If you're ever bored, go on Google or any search engine you'd like, type in Jesus, go to images, and see if you could find a picture where the sun is not behind his head. They're telling you this. They're openly telling you this. You just don't know what you're looking at. Now, this, Hannibal, the two fingers up like this, okay? This is an ancient Egyptian, an ancient Kemetic peace sign. This is the original peace sign. This that we know as a peace sign now, this John Lennon sign, this is a V for victory. The fingers are separate. It's a war sign. This is Churchill's British victory sign. This is the ancient peace sign. So I know it's going to sound crazy to you, but when you see Jesus doing this, or you see Vishnu doing this in India, or you see Baphomet even, or you see any of these deities, Buddha doing this, they're telling you they're peaceful. And in the second half of my presentation, I'll demystify Baphomet, Satan, hell, and Lucifer for you. But the white Jesus picture, his face, that stereotypical face, is actually a replica of a guy named Caesar Borgia from the Borgia Illuminati family. Now, he was the bastard son of Pope Alexander VI, and he literally was a bastard, and he was a bastard son because popes used to have children. They would have sex all the time back in the day. They just never had families because you weren't allowed. Now, what happened was Borgia, Rodrigo Borgia, the Pope, who became Pope Alexander VI, 80 years prior to that, the printing press came out. And to this day, the printing press is probably the most important invention that ever came out. More than the computer, more than modern medicine, the printing press. A lot of people say that. You can make your own decision on that. Okay, so now his face was taken as that, and I'm going to show you a picture of him. They're not identical, but you're going to see where they get the idea for his face. Now, the white and the red that he's wearing is alchemical. When I told you that the Bible is also an alchemy book, I just threw this in for an example. The white and the red, the reason Jesus always wears white and red, is because it is the merging of the red king and the white queen in alchemy. See, in alchemy, people think alchemy is just this medieval science that came before chemistry, and it's not. It's incredibly spiritual. The whole turning lead into gold thing is a metaphorical thing. It's about turning your lower self into your higher self. Now, merging the red king and the white queen is mixing sulfur with mercury. Sulfur being the white, mercury being the red. So it's alchemy. The heart outside the body, well, the crown of thorns, I should say, and the heart outside the body represents the rays of the sun. The heart outside the body represents the toroidal field, or the human torus field. Now look, go to the next slide. You can see pictures of Jesus, the sun, the sun, the sun, the sun. In the second picture, they actually have a Knights Templar cross in it, but it's all the same. Look, the two fingers up, the heart outside the body. They always show you the same exact things because this is what they're telling you. If you go to the next slide, you'll see pictures of baby Jesus. And look, you'll always see Polaris, the North Star, being illustrated very prominently in the back, right? In all these pictures. The sun is behind Jesus's head in all pictures. Now, if you go to the next slide, this is the toroidal field. It's an electromagnetic field of the heart. Okay? This is in metaphysics. It starts here, right here with your core, and it goes around you 6 feet like this. Okay? It looks like an apple. It's your heart's electromagnetic field of energy. That's why the elites during the pandemic tried to keep you 6 feet apart. It's so that you couldn't interact with one or another on an electromagnetic field of heart. Hannibal, if someone comes up behind you, even if you're wearing headphones and you just know they're there, they broke your toroidal field. You're not psychic. Okay, it's a measurable thing. Some people call it an aura. There's different words for it. If you go to the next slide, you can see what happens when two people within 6 feet are interacting with each other. It forms a Vesica Pisces. This is why it's so important with who you let within your circle. Now, the next slide is...
Yeah, I wish I'd known that about a year ago.
What happened?
Oh, I won't get into detail, but yes, it's very important who you let into your circle.
Yeah.
I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, because your energies imprint on each other. This is metaphysics right here. Now, if you go to the next slide, okay, so Jesus on the left, and you'll see an early drawing of Caesar Borgia on the right. Okay, now I'm not saying they're identical, but you can definitely see where they get their facial features from. And there's plenty more pictures of Caesar Borgia where he looks spot on like Jesus. This happens to be just the first picture that I found. Now, if you go to the next slide, before the Shroud of Turin was discovered in 525 AD, almost all paintings and drawings of Jesus showed a beardless young man. So I want to pause for a second because now we're going to start getting into the decoding stuff, which is always fun. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what we're doing so far.
It's interesting. You bring up a good point that you never see a picture with the sun anywhere, but directly kind of behind Jesus in those type of pictures.
Right.
And yeah, the stuff about my sign is interesting. Now, when you say that Libra represents justice and stuff,
yeah,
and how does that affect the individual people, how they behave?
Well, here's a misnomer. Here's what you don't really understand. Now, remember, I'm not an astrologer. I'm an astrotheologist. They're cousins. I do have an astrologer that can come on, do your chart live, and you'll be blown away because she is dead on accurate. What was I going to say? With Libra, for example, or with the signs, it's not just your sun sign. Your sun sign is Libra. You have a rising sign and you have a moon sign. And then it's not just that. That tells a bigger part of it. But there's a bigger part, like the asteroids, and you have all the planets, where they lined up, where they are. They all interact. And if you think about the fact that we were all one at one point, right? It makes complete sense. And if you think about the fact that space and time is an illusion, right? Because we know space and time is an illusion. Then things interact. It doesn't matter how far away they are, because they will interact with us. This is our little makeup, and I'm going to get into that. But if we go back to the slideshow and we...
How long have you accepted that space and time is an illusion for? Because I've only been hearing this about the past year myself, people talking about...
Well, let me give you an example, Hannibal. Okay, and in quantum physics, we have something called... what is the word for it? Quantum entanglement. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is.
So it's real simple to explain. Well, it's not real simple to explain, but I'll explain it very simply. You have two molecules, right? two molecules. They're attached. You separate them. You move one to the end of the universe and the other one to the other end. When you do something that affects one of them, the other, regardless of distance, becomes affected instantaneously as well. So space and time doesn't matter. It's an illusion.
Interesting.
All right. So now, before you go to the next slide, have you heard of the phrase "pride comes before the fall"?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Can you explain it?
No, I cannot.
Okay. So I'll say pride comes before the fall. Does this make sense to you? If someone says pride comes before the fall, it basically means that your
If you get too arrogant, it bites you in the ass.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's perfect. Yes, pride comes before the fall. Is you have to let your hubris win. Otherwise, you're gonna have your downfall if you get too prideful, too arrogant. You know, it's the story of the Tower of Babel, where they wanted to build a place going to God, and then they lost. They switched their languages up. It's just a good metaphor. However, in astrology, do you know what a group of lions is called?
I don't, but pride comes before the fall is definitely true. I've seen that play out so many times.
Right, and that does play out for sure. But astrologically, switch to the next slide. The group of lions is called the pride. Pride is the lion.
Oh yeah, I thought you said group of lions, as in like lions on a paper. I
Oh
get
no,
it.
a group
Yeah.
of lions is called the pride. Pride is
Yeah.
the lion. The lion is Leo, the lion. Leo is in July and August. That comes right before the fall. So you see how that works?
Ah, yes.
So that's astrologically. Now if you go to the next slide, this is Micah 5:2. This is where I get my namesake. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are smaller among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times. However, in Hebrew, Bethlehem is a combination of two words. It's Bet, which means house, and Lechem, which means bread. So the house of bread. Well, earlier I told you each zodiac sign was called a house. Who would be the house of bread? It would be the lady with the wheat stalk. The wheat is the bread. Okay, this is Virgo, the wheat stalk, the virgin. So what it's really saying is the Savior will come from Bethlehem. The Savior will come from a virgin. Does that make sense?
Yes. 100% yes.
Okay, good. So the next one, he gave them honey from the cliffs and olive oil from the rocky grounds. He gave them people butter from the herd and milk from the flock. He gave them lambs and goats. They had the best rams from Bashan and the finest wheat. They drank the best wine made from the juice of red grapes. But Jeshurun became fat and kicked like a bull. So you should be able to pick up on some of these signs, but let's go through Deuteronomy 32 together. He gave them honey from the cliffs. Now, in the sign Cancer, all the way at the top of the zodiac, there's a group of stars called the Beehive Cluster. It's an asterism, and an asterism means it's a closely knit group of stars. It's like the Pleiades. It's like the Seven Sisters. So the honey comes from Cancer, where the Beehive Cluster is. We know that olive oil is Libra, because I mentioned that's when you crush the olives. He gave his people butter from the herd and milk from the flock. Well, the milk comes from the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy center is in Sagittarius. And the Milky Way galaxy has been called the Milky Way galaxy, and I've traced it back as far back as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and probably even further. So, the milk is in Sagittarius. That's where the center of the Milky Way galaxy is. The honey is in Cancer. So your land from Cancer to Sagittarius, that's the right half of the zodiac, those 6 signs, is your land of milk and honey. It's not a place on earth. It is a thing in the heavens that they show you. That is your land of milk and honey. Now he gave them lambs and goats. Well, lambs are Aries and goats are Capricorn. They had the best rams. Rams are Aries from Bashan, and the finest wheat. The wheat is Virgo, the lady with the wheat stalk. They drank the best wine. We know that's Libra, made from the juice of red grapes. That's Libra. But Jeshurun became fat and kicked like a bull, and we know the bull is Taurus. So do you see how there's 10 signs in this one passage?
Yes. Yeah. You decoded this yourself, or did you read about this?
No, this is all mine.
Okay.
I'm putting myself on the line. This is all my stuff. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about the Mount of Olives. Jesus led his disciples to the Mount of Olives after his last Passover, so that he could teach them a few more things, pray, then wait for Judas to betray him. While walking to the Mount of Olives, he gave the parable of the true vine. So come back on real quick for a sec. Follow this with me, okay? Look at the zodiac wheel. Now, Passover takes place in Aries. So find Aries on the wheel. It's all the way on the left, right?
Yeah, it's my eyes are not the greatest. I'll make it bigger so I can see better. Yeah, okay, I see it now.
Aries is on the left. We're right after that. He walks to the Mount of Olives. Well, I told you Olives were Libra. How do you go from Aries to Libra? You just go across the zodiac. They're known as opposing signs.
Right.
While in Libra, they're waiting for Judas to betray him. Who did I tell you the betrayer was? It was Scorpio with the bite. So from Libra, you're waiting for Scorpio, which is the next sign over. These patterns will always be opposing signs or connecting signs. Okay, it'd be one thing if they were just randomly talking about a goat and a fish and twins and a crab, but these actually make patterns. So you go from Aries to Libra, those are opposing signs. You're waiting for the betrayal, which is the next sign in Scorpio. So you're still waiting in Libra. While you're in Libra, he gives the parable of the true vine, which has to do with grapes and wine. And grapes and wine are in Libra. Does this make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, this is how we're going to be decoding things. Is we're going to be using the zodiac wheel, using the keywords, and showing you how this works. Now, if you go to the next slide. Okay. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Now, a lot of people think that the firmament is a dome over a flat earth. A lot of people think that, and it's not. The firmament are the dividing lines between the zodiac signs. So do you see these dividing lines between the signs, Hannibal?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay, those don't actually exist. Okay, it's not like the zodiac wheel has lines in the sky. It's they're trying to, in a very short picture, encapsulate what the heavens look like in a 360-degree angle. What these lines, they're called the firmament. What these lines represent is a 3-day sign on each side where the energies hand over from one to another. You guys might know it as the word cusp or handover dates. That's what this shows. So if we reread this real quick, first, Pisces and Aquarius are the two waters, remember? And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament. Well, there's Pisces and there's the firmament under, from the waters which were above the firmament, and that's Aquarius. So this is actually just talking about creation of Aquarius, the firmament, and Pisces. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. It makes me understand it a bit better.
Okay, good. Now, if you go to the next slide, Hannibal, we're going to go into Revelation. The first living creature was like an ox. I'm sorry, I lied. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was a flying eagle. So go to the next slide. The first living creature was like a lion. That's Leo. The second was like an ox. That's Taurus. The third had a face like a man. That's Aquarius. The fourth was like a flying eagle. So I need to explain the eagle to you guys. In astrology, the scorpion is the belly-crawling creature. It's the lowest form of life on Earth. Any of these animals that crawl on their belly, it's considered a punishment. It's a low form of life on Earth. The first thing that God does in the metaphorical story of Adam and Eve, after the deception from the snake, is he takes away the snake's legs and makes him slither on his belly. It's a punishment. In fact, in Mexico, during Santo de la Muerte, Okay, men dress up in suits. They get all real nice and pretty, and then they get down on all fours in the dirt and they crawl to church. Okay, it's to symbolize this. Now, its evolved form, okay, is known as the eagle. It's called the ascendant. Okay, rising sign even. So the eagle becomes Scorpio. So what happens is you have the scorpion that crawls on its belly. It's the lowest form of life on Earth. It evolves into the eagle. That's the highest flying form of life on Earth. The eagle evolves one more time and becomes the phoenix. And what is the story of the phoenix? Well, it's a flaming ball of life that dies and is resurrected from its ashes. It's the story of Jesus. It's the story of the sun. So Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio, or the eagle, are the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. You have 3 different kinds of signs in the zodiac. You have your cardinal signs. That's why you have cardinals in church. You have your fixed sign. Your fixed sign is fixed because it's fixed in the season. Leo is in the middle of summer. Taurus is in the middle of spring. Aquarius is in the middle of winter. The eagle or Scorpio is in the middle of fall. Then you have your mutable sign, which is the water sign, which takes you out. So there's 4 seasons. You have 3 of these signs in each. Now, I mentioned that the cardinal sign was the first sign in the season. Okay, each sign can be broken down into 3 10-day segments called deacons. And that, my friends, is why you have deacons and cardinals in church, because it's astrology and they don't want you to know about this. But now going back to this, let's take a look here real quick. You'll notice that the lion Leo and the man Aquarius, Leo and Aquarius, are opposing signs on the zodiac. They're exactly 6 apart. Taurus, the bull, and eagle, the scorpion, are also 6 signs apart. So go back 1 slide, not forward, back 1 slide. Okay, just give me a quick sec. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. 4 fixed signs. So let me ask you a question. To everybody that's listening, guys, is there going to be a 4-headed animal in the heavens that's going to signal the end of the days? Or go 2 slides up, please. Is it just showing you this pattern in the zodiac, this perfect cross, this X of the 4 fixed signs? What is more likely? What makes more sense to you guys? You know, leave comments. Please let me know if this makes sense to you guys. Instead of having a 4-headed animal, it's making this pattern. Now, if we go to the next slide, Ezekiel 10:14, it's the same thing. Each of the cherubim had 4 faces. One face was that of a cherub, the second face of a human being, the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. Now, if you go to the next slide, we're going to go into another passage from Revelation. Revelation 12. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. So, again, people read Revelation as if it's a literal thing. There's going to be a giant dragon in front of a pregnant woman in the heavens. But if you go to the next slide, please, Hannibal. A woman clothed with the sun is the sun clothed in Virgo. See, we're dealing with celestial metaphors left and right here. This is just a metaphor for the sun being in Virgo. If the sun is in Virgo, the moon will be at her feet. So guys and girls, there's 12 zodiac signs. It's a 24-hour-a-day clock. So by math, the sun spends 2 hours a day in each sign. Now, if you look at the zodiac wheel and you see Capricorn at the bottom, that's winter. That's midnight. That's when it's darkest, right? And you follow this and you get to Virgo, that's between 4 and 6 p.m. Well, if it's between 4 and 6 p.m., the sun is still out. And if the sun is out, the moon is at her feet. Because when the moon is up, the sun is at her feet. These are just metaphors, okay? Now, another sign appeared in the heaven, an enormous dragon. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to earth. The constellation Draco is the dragon. Its tail goes from Aries to Sagittarius, which is 4/12 of the signs, or 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. That's the constellation on the left. That's Draco the dragon. You can look at the tail. So again, I'm just showing you. Let's go to one more. let's go to Revelation 7:4. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from the tribes of Israel. I put this in here not so much because it's astrotheology, but because I want to show you that it's a mix of Eastern philosophy too. And more importantly, there's Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, and people that actually believe that only 144,000 people get to go to heaven and see God. But I'm going to show you how everyone gets to go see God. So if you're familiar with the chakras, please go to the next slide. There are 7 chakras. The root has 4 petals, the sacral has 6, the solar plexus has 10, the heart has 12, and the throat has 16, which equals 48. The third eye chakra is represented by 96 and only has 2 petals because it's 2 times as powerful as the lower chakras. So 48 times 2 equals 96. The crown chakra is 1,000 times more powerful than the lower 6 chakras. When you add the lower 6, you get 96 plus 48 equals 144. You multiply that by 1,000, you get your 144,000. So for those of you who are spiritual or who understand the chakras, when you've activated all your chakras, that is when you get to go see God. That's all they're talking about. They're not talking about people dying or only 144,000 people coming to life. So let me just pause here for a sec and ask you, Hannibal, what do you think so far?
It's a little complicated for someone that hasn't researched it much, but I can see where you're coming from, and I can see I can understand your theories on it, and some of it makes sense related to the stuff I'm familiar with. Like I've heard that part about the Jehovah Witnesses before, related to the 144,000 going to heaven.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's continue. Let's go to the next slide.
It might be something I'm going to have to watch a second time for it to compute more, because sometimes
Yeah, honestly, that's totally fine if that's the case. You got to remember, Hannibal, is I've been studying this. I've been studying the Bible for 30 years, the occult and the esoteric for 20, and astrotheology for 11, and I've been teaching it for 3 years. I'm giving you 11 years. No, I'm giving you 30 years worth of study in 1 hour. Technically 2, because we got a second half, but you got to understand is that if you got to rewatch it a bunch of times, I'm not looking to convert people or just wake people or to do. I'm looking to plant seeds. That's what I'm doing.
And then people can do their own research and get confirmation on stuff.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. Matthew 10:16. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, this is a famous paragraph. Well, the sheep is Aries, and the wolf is the constellation Lupus, who borders the Libra line. Look at the patterns it makes. They're opposing signs. So these are deeply encoded celestial metaphors. Now, if you go to the next slide, I've given examples of astrotheology in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. I've been accused of cherry-picking verses from the Bible to prove a point. Let's take a much longer passage and see if we can decode it as well. Hannibal, do you know the story of Job?
Not offhand, no. But maybe if I hear the story.
I'll explain it then. Job was a righteous man, everyone. First of all, the book of Job, everyone that wants to know, is the oldest book in the Bible. It predates Genesis by a long shot. Okay? When they got together at the council of, at the Synod of Jamnia in 100 AD, they put the Bible books in order because the Old Testament was not canonized by then. We'll get into that in the second part. But the book of Job is actually the oldest book in the Bible. Now, Job was a righteous man. He had land, he had family, he had a wife, he had kids, he had animals, he had money. Satan went up to God one day and said, he's only your most faithful servant because he has everything. If you take it away from him, he'll curse you. And God actually thinks about it and then takes the bet. And he tells Satan, you have permission to do whatever you want to him, but you cannot take his life. So little by little, everything starts dying or he starts losing everything. At one point, he's sitting on the ground and he's crying up to heaven, and God actually answers him. They'll have you believe that God actually answers him. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you God's answer. And the first sentence is going to be what comes from the Bible. And the second sentence is going to be the astrological. So first God says, if you go to the next slide, please, can you lead forth the Mazzaroth? Well, the Mazzaroth is the zodiac. It literally means the zodiac in Hebrew. Mazzaroth over time becomes the Mazalot, which survives in Judaism today as Mazel Tov, which means good fortune from the stars. You know how old Mazel Tov is. And the first sentence he says is, do you know your zodiac? Well, then what does he say? The Lord's challenge to Job. He says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? These are obvious celestial metaphors, but the rest are encoded. Can you bring forth the constellations in their season or lead out the bear with its cubs? The constellations are the zodiac above. The bear and its cubs are Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Ursa Minor, part of the Big Dipper. Who can tip over the water jars of heavens? I mean, there's literally a picture of a man tipping over the water jars of heavens in Aquarius, so that's what that is. Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger for the lions? That's Leo. Who provides food for the raven? That's the next slide, please. Who provides food for the raven? No, go back one. The constellation Corvus, which means raven and borders on Virgo. Do you watch where the doe bears her fawn? Mriga, meaning deer, is located in Orion. Who let the wild donkey go free? That's a Celis Borealis, meaning donkey, and is located in Cancer. Will the wild ox consent to serve you? That's Taurus. The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully. That's Lambda Achille or Al Thaliman, which means two ostriches in Arabic. Do you give the horse its strength? So they said horse, so we know that's Sagittarius. But let's just check to see if anything else shows. It laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. It does not shy away from the sword. The quiver, see, they mentioned the quiver right there. What is a quiver? A quiver is what sits on the side of the horse by the man that has the arrows. So we know it's Sagittarius with the man with the bow and the arrow. Then he says, does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? That's Aquila, which is the Latin name for eagle, and is a constellation a few degrees above the celestial equator. Finally, he says, can you pull in Leviathan with a fish hook? And that's an ancient fish god, and the fish is Pisces. So if you look at the book of Job, every line is talking about the stars. Now, if you go to the next slide, we can go into Psalms. And if you notice that I'm jumping from book to book to book with no real atomus to it. I'm just kind of jumping from book to book. The reason I'm doing that is to show you. I'm doing that on purpose. I'm doing that to show you that it doesn't matter what book I go into from the Bible, from the New or the Old Testament, that you can apply this cipher to everything. Now, Psalms, even Psalms 104, he sends forth springs in their valley. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle, and wine which makes man's heart glad, so that he may make his face glisten with oil. The high mountains are for the wild goats. He made the moon for the seasons. The sun knows the place of its setting. The young lions were after their prey. So if you go to the next slide, the springs are Aquarius. The wild donkeys are Celis Borealis, which are in Cancer. The cattle is Taurus the bull. The wine is Libra. The oil is Libra. The wild goats are Capricorn. The moon for the seasons and the sun knows the place of its setting is openly talking about the sun and the moon. The lions were after their prey or Leo. So if you go 2 slides down now, because there was another one from Psalms, but I'm not going to do it just because I showed the first one already. Answers to questions at the beginning, how Jesus was able to heal the blind. Well, in the story in the Bible, the blind man comes up to Jesus. Jesus licks his fingers and touches the man's eyes, and suddenly he can see. But the sun does the same thing too. Like right now, if you look, it's dark outside. Okay, it's 8 o'clock at night in New York. It's dark. I'm blind. I can't see anything. But when the sun comes up and touches my eyes in the morning, I'm given the gift of sight again. How he walked on water, it's the same thing. The sun does the same thing. The sun walks across the water during a sunset, if you've ever seen that before. Now, in Greek, Christ means Christos. Okay, and Christos means oil. So Jesus is known as the anointed one, the oil. Well, doesn't oil also walk on water when you pour oil onto water? This is a triple entendre they're telling you right here. Now, how he turned water into wine, this is a process. This is not actually a parlor trick. This is not something that Jesus did on the fly. How he turned water into wine is simply this. The reason God is considered a man and earth is considered a woman has to do with one thing. And it has to do with God's rain, the sacred fluid. In Hebrew, we call it shemen. We get the word semen from it. So, what happens? Well, God's shemen comes onto Mother Earth, and then from her belly, everything grows. Food, vegetation, life, Everything grows. So what happens is you have Taurus, as above, so below. April showers bring May flowers. You plant, you put the plow on the bull, you plant in Taurus, and then you plant the grapes in Taurus, and then it rains and it rains and it rains and it rains. And then in September, October, during Libra, you pick the grapes and you turn it into wine. That's how you turn God's water originally into wine. Why he had 12 disciples. We went over this briefly, I believe. Judas being Scorpio, the betrayer. John the Baptist would be, I'm just going to give you 4 examples. I'm not going to go through all 12, but John the Baptist being Aquarius, the man with the water pitcher, because he's going around baptizing people. You have Simon Peter. My name is Micah. Some people call me Mike. Thomas Tom. Anthony Tony. These are names that make sense, but Simon Peter doesn't make sense unless you understand astrology. See, Simon's job, he was a fisherman, and the fish are Pisces. And how do you get the name Peter? Well, the ruling planet of Pisces is Jupiter, or Jew Peter. These are just plays on words. And the 4th example I'll give you is, I'll say Thomas Didymus would be the twin, Gemini. Why? Ta'om in Hebrew means twin, and Didymus in Greek means twin. Each one of the disciples represents one of the 12 zodiac signs, and there's a story behind it. Now, why was he betrayed with a kiss by Judas? We went over that. Why was he dead for 3 days? We went over that. Why was his birthday on December 25th? We went over that. So if you go to the next slide, please. This science that I'm teaching you all only works for people in the Northern Hemisphere, and there is a reason for that. The Egyptians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all based out of the Northern Hemisphere. For example, June 21st, the summer solstice, is actually the winter solstice in Australia and New Zealand, much of South Africa and South America. See, what happened was, this is a farmer's almanac. This is an astrological farmer's almanac that maps out the heavens. That's how you read it astrologically. That's how you read the Bible astrologically. Now, if you go to the next slide, but it doesn't stop there. It's not just random passages in the Bible that can be decoded this way. We're going to go through the entire book of Matthew to show how deep this runs. So I'm going to run through this, and that's what we'll do. So if we go to the next slide, what you'll see here is I've put the zodiac wheel on the left, and I've made a red ring in each sign so you know where we are, so you can follow in case this is still a little difficult. So Matthew 3:2, repent of your sins and turn to God, for the kingdom of heaven is near. Now each gospel begins at one of the 4 major zodiac points and ends at one of them as well too. The 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes, when connected, form a cross. This is known as the cross of God's sun. The kingdom of heaven is Leo, whose ruling planet is the sun. This is the only sign that the sun rules over. The closest of the 4 points is June 21st in Cancer. So that's why I did that. I highlighted the summer solstice because that's right before Leo. Because the kingdom of heaven is near. Well, the kingdom of heaven is Leo. That's right after Cancer. So if you go to the next slide, this is the firmament. Okay, the dividing lines, remember? This is the firmament between Cancer and Leo. It's the beginning of the kingdom. There's a saying in the Bible that says the firmament shows God's handiwork. The firmaments are the dividing lines between signs. Now the next passage, Matthew 3:4, John's clothes were woven from coarse camel hair, and he wore a leather belt around his waist. For food he ate locusts and wild honey. If we take the most famous drawing of a man, Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and superimpose it onto the zodiac, we can make sense of that. So just 2 notes before we go to the next slide. I've gotten stuff from Christians before who say that Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man wasn't out at the time the Bible was written, so that discredits everything. That's what they tell me. And that's not true, because I could use a stick figure. I just used the Vitruvian Man. The other thing, too, is that if you look at the firmament right here, how this is at a firmament, when you're decoding this and you're in one sign completely, like say I'm in Leo, for example, right? You can use it to talk about the lion, the lioness, or the cub. In Cancer, I could talk about the crab or the scarab or the beetle or the honey, right? Because we mentioned that the beehive cluster was in Cancer, okay? But if you're at the firmament because you're in a handover date where the energies spill over, you can talk about either of them. Does that make sense? I'm going to assume that makes sense, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, my dog had to go out to the bathroom here.
Oh, that's okay. All right, no biggie. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Cancer being the head is why he eats wild honey. See, the head is in Cancer, the mouth is in Cancer, the beehive cluster is in Cancer, so he's eating the honey. Now, Leviticus 11, what's clean and unclean to eat? All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean by you. There are, however, some flying insects that walk on all fours that you may eat, those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these, you may eat any kind of locust. So there it is, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. So if you realize what they're trying to do nowadays, go to the next slide, where they're trying to get you to eat bugs nowadays, right? A pound of grasshopper is 3 times as nutrition as a pound of beef. They're trying to get you to eat bugs. That's biblical. They're taking it straight from the Bible. Okay, that's where that comes from. Now, if we go to the next slide.
Have you personally tried that? Have you personally tried bugs just out of curiosity?
Oh, hell no. All right, go to the next slide. Now, a little lower on the body is the clothes made out of camel hair. Now, in Gemini, we were in Leo first, then we were in Cancer, now we're in Gemini. So far, I've made a pattern of 3 connecting signs. Okay? The kingdom of heaven in Leo, in Cancer, and then in Gemini. Now, in Gemini, there's a constellation called Camelopardalis, which is in Gemini. So right now you have the head and the upper body so far. This is why he eats locusts, he wears camel hair, and he eats wild honey. Now, if you go to the next sign, that's Taurus. Now this is 4 signs in a row. Moving a little lower on the body, you'll get his midsection, which is where you would wear a belt. Taurus represents the bull, and the female is the cow, which is where you get the leather. You get the leather from the cow. Regarding the belt, Orion's belt sits between Taurus and Gemini. So next would be the baptism. Now, how are we going to go from the beginning of Leo to a water sign to signify the baptism? You would go across the zodiac. Cross signs, as they are known, are the signs opposite location. For example, Aries and Libra are cross signs. This is very important. Aside's 3 most important signs are its 2 neighboring signs and its cross sign. So go to the next slide. Here we see how it makes a leap from one firmament to another. The man with the water pitcher in Aquarius personified as John the Baptist with the water. It's important to note, too, that John the Baptist and Jesus are always exactly 6 months apart. When you think about the fact that Jesus is born on December 25th and rises a degree a day, then that must mean that John the Baptist is born on June 24th and decrease a degree a day. This is why in John 3:30, John says, "He must increase, but I must decrease." It's also why St. John's Day is exactly 6 months to the day of Christmas. Now, the next story is the temptation of Jesus. So we're going back to the Cancer-Leo firmament of July 24th. Well, this is simple. He's tempted by the devil for 40 days. So what do? I'll just count 40 days. That's all you got to do. July 24th is the date. Takes you to September 2nd. What is September 2nd? That's right in the middle of Virgo, the lady with the wheat stalk, the bread, remember? Go to the next slide. What is the next passage? Matthew 4:3. If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. Here we see mention of the bread, which tells you that the sun is in Virgo. Now the next passage, Matthew 5:17 and 22. I did not come to abolish the law, and if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. Well, the law and the judgment is Libra. So now you went from Leo to Virgo to Libra. Now you made another 3 patterns, another 3 signs in a row. Now, if you go to the next slide, Matthew 7:15-16, beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep. And can you pick grapes from the thorn bushes? Well, the sheep are Aries and the grapes are Libra. Those are opposing signs. Moving along, Matthew 13, later that same day, Jesus left the house and sat beside the lake. The story now moves from Libra to the barrier between Aquarius and Pisces, as he is right beside the lake, or the 2 water signs. See, if they said he was in the lake, or he went in the lake, he'd be in one of the signs. But because he's beside the lake, that means it's just a metaphor for being at the firmament. Now, its cross sign is the Leo-Virgo firmament. As it's across from Virgo, the wheat stalk and the grains, is it ironic that the next parables from Jesus are the wheat and the weeds, the mustard seed, and the yeast? Moving right along, next is the fishing net parable. So we just go back across the zodiac again to the Aquarius Pisces line, touching Pisces, so we could talk about the fishing net. So go to the next slide. Gemini is the sign of two men, technically twins. However, there's just a short mention of brothers in the next passage. He's just the carpenter's son. We know Mary, his mother, and his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. So we're in Gemini, and this ends at the firmament of Gemini Cancer, because it's still Gemini. How do we know that? Well, if you take the Gemini Cancer firmament and you follow it to its opposing sign, Hannibal, that's the firmament of Sagittarius Capricorn. You know what that day is? That's December 21st. That's the day of death.
The longest day of the year.
The longest night of the year.
Yeah,
the longest night of the year. Right? So you see how we were in Gemini, now we're at the firmament, and then it goes to Sagittarius Capricorn. Firmament, that's the day of death. So what's the very next story? It's the death of John the Baptist. As I mentioned previously, death comes at the end of Sagittarius. Now let's take a sentence which sounds like it could be in the Bible, but isn't. This is something I made up just to show you how this works. If I say to you, the rulers were divided between war and love, it split the land in half. You could read that as a literal translation. Or if you go to the next slide, the ruling planet, if you go to the next slide, the ruling planet of Aries is Mars, who is the god of war. The ruling planet of Libra is Venus, who is the goddess of love. There is your war and love. If you connect it, it literally splits the land or the zodiac in half, the land being the zodiac. Go to the next slide. Matthew 14, 17, and 32. But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Well, the bread and the fish are opposing signs, right? Pisces is the 2 fish, and its opposing sign is Virgo, the lady with the wheat stalk. Also, Pisces is the 2 fish, which is why Jesus fed the masses with 2 fish. And as far as the fact they give you 5 loaves of bread, the year starts in Aries. If you start counting from Aries all the way to Virgo, that's 5 signs. Now, if you go to the next sign, I'm showing you the cross of God's Son. This is what happens when you connect the solstices and the equinoxes. This is why Jesus, the Son of God, has a cross. We were just in Virgo, and now next is Libra, which is law and wine and oil, remember? What stories do we get now? We get the story of the temple tax, the unforgiving debtor, divorce and marriage, so all the law stuff, and the parable of the vineyard worker. Well, the vineyard is still Libra. That's the wine. So next slide. Next is Scorpio, the betrayer. This is where Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. And then next, here's where Jesus is crucified on the cross. So we went from Virgo to Libra to Scorpio to Sagittarius. 4 signs in a row. Now go to the next slide real quick, because that's the end of Matthew. Astrology is a language. If you understand this language, the sky speaks to you. So go to the next slide, because I'm going to explain this all now. What is the point of this? We take for granted that we have calendars, clocks, watches, weathermen. The ancients didn't have any of that. They had sundials. In the Bible, they worked on dream interpretations for harvest. They had to know things. They needed to know Taurus is when you put the plow on the bull and plant as above, so below. The Bible, astrotheologically, is an encoded farmer's almanac and was the knowledge of staying alive, the most important thing. They would look at the stars and see all this movement and make stories up about them and pass them down to their children, then them to their children. Eventually, they learned how to write and wrote them all down as it evolves from Sumerian to Babylonian to Egyptian to Judaism in the Old Testament, then to the Christians in the New Testament. And if you scroll down on that, it didn't fit on the slide. I don't know if you can do that, but I'll read you this quote.
I don't know if I know how to do that.
Okay, I'll read you the quote then. It's from John Dominic Cresson. Wait, go back. No, other way. My point, once again, is not that those ancient people told literal stories, and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically, and we are now dumb enough to take them literally. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that I have a book series where I teach this kind of stuff as well as this. These are topics discussed in the book series. It's gematria. I'm just going to read them real quick. gematria, etymology, numerology, astronomy, astrology, astrotheology, out-of-body experiences, the Akashic records, symbology, remote viewing, religious secrets, capstones of the pyramids, mystery school channelers, near-death experiences, DMT monitoring, lucid dreaming, acoustic levitation, physics and quantum physics, psychotherapy, psychology, spiritual guides and shared dreaming, crystal technology, conspiracies that not many people know about, and secret societies. If you go to the next slide, these are my 8 books that I have out right now. It's a book series. It starts with Beneath the Veil, and it goes to the right, to the Sacred Stones, the Secret Weapon, Pangea's Pandemic. Pangea's Pandemic is where I predicted a problem with the global flu vaccine 3 years before it even came out. My book I wrote it in 2017. My book literally came out 2020, right before the pandemic. I'd written it 3 years prior. This is my book series. It has all those topics and everything that I went over today. You could really learn. They're fun. It's like 1984. George Orwell's 1984 mixed with Da Vinci Code, mixed with Young Wise Ass Kids. They're really fun reads. And if you go to
Very cool covers, I must say.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, my book publisher is great. Beneath the Veil, the first one, if you go to Amazon and type in Micah Dank into the rabbit hole Beneath the Veil, just read some of the comments before you commit to buying this. You know, I'm not shilling this stuff. I'm just telling you is if you want to learn more, this is where I keep all the information. And if you go to the next slide, I also have a kids astrotheology book that I wrote with my astrologer. It's called A is for Aries. It's for 6 to 11-year-olds. It's an introduction to what I just did for you, but even for kids. And if you go to the next slide, which is the last one, my email is intotherabbitholeseries@gmail.com. Micah Dank Truth Bombs, that's my YouTube channel. I have 3 playlists. I have an astrotheology playlist, which breaks down any book that you want to see. I have a section called Short Bombs, which is where I try and blow your mind with hidden knowledge within 2 to 6 minute interviews. And I have an interview section. And Hannibal, that's my presentation, man. What do you think?
It's interesting stuff for sure, and as someone comments on here, the first time absorbing some of that is kind of tricky, but I'm definitely going to watch it back. Somebody commented, "Have you ever heard of this guy Norse Magic?"
No.
Yeah, neither have I, but definitely it's something that I'm going to look into more and check out your YouTube channel for sure, because I definitely see you have some valid correlations there, and I can tell you've researched this stuff a lot. As you said, 30 years of knowledge. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of this information with us.
Thanks, man. And reach out to me. Let me know if you're interested in doing part 2 at any time.
Sounds good. And I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans here to close it off. Thanks again.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. I really appreciate the comments that I got early on. You know, you never know with larger channels how people are going to get. Haven't heard anything really negative, so that's always good. I know it's a lot, but I could promise you that you can't break it down any more simple than this. This is the true hidden knowledge that they're keeping from us. And I know some of it has to make sense to you guys. I know some of it has to make sense. So come on my channel, learn everything. If you're interested in the books, I do sell signed copies. If you don't want to go through Amazon, just email me or just get them from Amazon. I mean, the first 2 are on audio and you can get them on, you know, this is where I put all the information because I just have so much information that I needed like multiple outlets to send this information out. So that's why I wrote a book series. And that's pretty much it, man.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news